is there data, science, proving that sugar and processed foods cause mental illness?
What does the data say? If you eat highly processed foods, you have 50 to 100% increased risk of clinical depression.
Oh.
If you eat high glycemic index foods, there's a great study that came out, a colleague at Columbia looking at high glycemic index foods. So those are foods that just spike your blood sugar more. Those have a significant increased risk. Individuals have an increased risk of depression. The Women's Health Initiative, so big study of women ages 45 plus. And so there's that correlational data, and it's just consistent. When you look at the meta-analyses of it, it's consistent that the food that we've created in the last 100 years leads to an increased risk in that population of depression. Same data for ADHD. Yeah. Not as much data for anxiety disorders, which is interesting, but certainly feels true to me clinically. Then we move on to randomized controlled trials. And the reason this is of interest is on the molecular side, like in the mouse models. I mean, you know this. Not having enough nutrients and putting lots and lots of fuel in any sort of
mouse look like?
Yeah, I mean, what depressed mouse looks like? I mean, it's very clear what depressed mice look like is you stick them in little cages and they don't try and you put them in to swim. It's a forced swim test. And when mice are depressed, they don't fight to get out. They just stop swimming.
They drown?
We don't let them drown, but they would drown if you didn't fish them out. Whereas non-depressed mice, they're fighting to get out.
Yeah,
that's what a depressed mouse looks like. So the randomized controlled trials that came out recently are exciting because we can say it makes common sense. We can say on a molecular level, it makes lots and lots of sense. We can say it makes sense in the correlational data, but you and I know, Mark, medicine's not going to change until we have randomized clinical trials. And that's where folks like Felice Jacka and Michael Burke and the Food and Mood Center in Australia, they're really, I would say, the leaders in this, where they've completed a number of trials. Natalie Parletta is also not part of that group, but say part of the leaders in this. And now they're putting down numerous randomized trials and creating resources for patients with mental health concerns like depression to make sure food's part of the equation. And their data looks quite strong. And what I love about this is when the data comes out, it's funny, one of the big leaders in psychiatry, won't mention him by name, but been very critical, it gets really critical. It's funny, there's a big post about how, and some, one of these health medicine review websites about, how bad the trial was or how small it was. Or it's like fighting. And
everybody's always criticizing each other about the study.
And I was like, so when we don't have data, you say there's no data. And then when people do a really good trial, you want to pick it apart.
Yeah.
And there's some feeling that it's almost like, folks have really...
People don't like paradigm shifts.
Well, I mean, is this how bad it's gotten, Mark? That we're at a paradigm shift? We're suggesting that our patients, our neighbors, our families eat well for things like when they're thinking about their brain and their mood and their dementia risk and their depression. Like, we've gotten so far down the rabbit hole of medicine that's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. It is absolutely nuts.
And you're right. There's so much data. Like, you might be aware of Hiblin's work, which was from the NIH, which showed the
Captain Joe Hiblin is like
he's a pretty cool guy.
He's the leader of he calls himself he's the Surgeon General's. He's a soldier in the Surgeon General's army.
There you go. And he did these amazing studies looking at the rise of the rise of omega-6 fats, refined oils, and the decrease in omega-3 fats leading to violence, homicide, suicide, and that changed behavior. And I remember once coming back from, somewhere, and I had a letter on my desk in my office, and it was from a prisoner who wrote me a letter, read my book, Ultra Metabolism, way back when, and said, I was a violent criminal all my life, and I realized, that when I changed my diet after reading this book in prison, I don't know how he did that he realized he was a very different person. And they've done prison studies where they feed prisoners healthy diets, and they reduce violent crime by 56%. If you give them a multivitamin, it reduces crime by 80%.
Well, you can
in prisons.
Yeah, you can just see that the notion that we don't approach that, right? What is criminal activity violence? So some of it's stuff we don't understand. Some of it's certainly horrible character pathology, but some of it, when we think that this is a population that in general does not have good nourishment, in general, does not learn a lot of mental health skills. There's a way that some of what's going on there is certainly just a result of a broken system of mental health care, and I would say a broken system of our culture. I've been really I've been inspired this month by the Benjamin Rush biography. And the reason is that I didn't know anything about Benjamin Rush. And Benjamin Rush is one of our youngest founding fathers. He is the second youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the only physician signer.
Yeah.
And he is our original American physician. They called him the American Hippocrates back in the day. And he's also our original psychiatrist. And he founded the first mental hospital, and he helped us found this country on a very, very simple principle, which is that when we think about mental illness, we can't put people in asylums and say that they don't have spirituality or they're sinners or they're bad people, that we as physicians are going to treat them as patients and we are going to care for them. And that has just inspired me to really think about what's happening in our country and how bad our mental health has gotten and how we all know about it. And we're just finally starting to talk about it. But we were founded as a place where we should have freedom to talk about this.
Yeah.
I'll get you a copy of the Benjamin Rush
Yeah,
biography.
it sounds
It's
fantastic.
like every doctor should read it.
So Drew, you wrote this paper. It was published September 2018 in the Psychiatric Journal, and it was really quite detailed in terms of its analysis of the types of foods and nutrients. So help us take this home. What are the things that you learned from there that are the most important nutrients we need, and what are the most important foods to help us get those nutrients and just in general to help us
for sure
our mental illness?
And so the paper's called Antidepressant Foods, and folks can check it out, and it's an open source article. And I did this with my colleague Dr. Laura LaChance, and quite simply it's arithmetic, it's bean counting, and we went through all of the literature looking at all of the essential nutrients, vitamins and minerals, and did a literature search to say, well, which of these have significant evidence that they can help prevent depression and that they can be used to treat depression? And there were 12 that we found. And I bet you could name all 12, Mark. They're the 12 we would expect: omega-3 fats and zinc and B12, vitamin E, magnesium, and then iron. And so then we looked at just a simple, what a nutrient profiling system is it just it's just a system for looking at what foods have the most of those nutrients per calorie. And then what a good nutrient profiling system does, and Dr. LaChance and I really wanted to create a good one because oddly, there are, I think, 27 nutrient profiling systems in the world that have been created. Some people have seen ones like the Andy or Nuval. You know how many have been about mental health?
None.
And so a good nutrient profiling system looks at food categories. So we're not saying kale, and people say, well, I don't like kale.
Can't eat too much of it. You'll go to hypothyroid.
Exactly. Oh no, it's toxic now. Now it's toxic, Mark. But what we say is leafy greens. And so what we did is we scored, we looked at all of the top foods for these nutrients, scored them, and then created a list of the top plant and animal foods. And so they're first of all, they're the foods that top the list, which I just think are interesting. Like oysters, clams, and mussels are in the top 5 on the animal side. And the reason we did animal foods is that no nutrient profiling system usually has any meat or any animals in it because it's all based on calories usually. And plants always have fewer calories. But most people eat meat or seafood, so we wanted to give folks a list of which had the most nutrients.
And why were the shellfish the top ones?
Top ones, because think about oysters. Why do they top the list? You got 10 to 15 calories per oyster. So let's just say, 6 oysters, 60 calories. And for those 60 calories, you're getting 768 milligrams of long-chain omega-3 fats. You're getting 340% of your vitamin B12. You're getting, at least a third of your iron. You're getting 500% of your daily need of zinc. And on and on and on. You're getting even some vitamin C in oysters.
Okay, let's go get some oysters.
Yeah, exactly. All that for 60 calories. And that's just, and on the other side, looking at plants, like things like watercress top the list. And why just watercress? Lots of nutrients, no calories or very few calories. And so that's a great example of nutrient density, those foods. And so the food categories that people should be looking for are things like leafy greens, the rainbow vegetables, more seafood. And if you're eating meat and red meat, to look more towards wild red meats or grass-fed red meats.
Mm-hmm. So this is fascinating. So the diet that prevents cancer, heart disease, dementia, depression, and fixes most chronic illness is the same diet.
It's where we got off in medicine. We kind of separated out mental health and brain health from the rest. Like you're saying, kind of like somehow the blood-brain barrier was like, thou shalt not pass. Like we didn't think that, sure, those same all those same activities that we think about in terms of our general health and the foods we want people to eat and the things we want people to do, move their bodies, connect, be part of their community. Yeah, that's key to your brain health and your mental health.
Yeah. If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.